Welcome. My name is John DaSilva. I'm with Ping Identity, currently with the professional services team. Some of you may have known me from prior role. I was in the training team. And I'm going to be talking a very long-winded title, but basically what I'm going to show you today is talk about federated identity and federated access management. And I'm going to try to focus not so much from a high level what's coming, but really more what is today, what you can do today, kind of in that realm, that idea. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the new features that are coming out, and you'll actually be able to see some of those tomorrow in the masterclass. It's already been mentioned a couple of times today in the session. So definitely encourage you to see those, because we'll be able to go into a lot more depth. My presentation is going to be primarily a demonstration. Okay? I'm not very big on a lot of talking, although for those of you that have probably attended my training sessions probably would doubt that, but believe me, my preference is really to show what can be done and what we want to do. So what I'm going to kind of try to show you is not only dealing with access control, access management, can I get access to that particular resource, and of course the classic authentication, who are you? And I'm going to introduce multi-factor authentication into the picture as part of that proof. But I also want to talk about the idea of provisioning. And in the earlier session this morning, after the lunch keynote, was about identity orchestration. So I'm really not going to, again, I'm not really talking about what's the long-range plan. I'm focusing primarily on what can we do today. And some of the things that we can do today, introduced in the new release, is adaptive authentication policies with ping access. And this is actually something we'll be demonstrating tomorrow in the masterclass. And what adaptive authentication is kind of what the prior session was talking about. Let's look at not only who are you, but the context of where we're at. And again, it's kind of the first path down that road of saying, in a very simple use case, is basically looking at the user's authenticated. I have a valid session from them. They've already authenticated, but their location has changed. Their network connectivity has changed. And let me do something. And what I want to do at that point is force an additional authentication, maybe a second factor, or maybe just have them re-authenticate, or maybe completely invalidate their session. Okay. Advanced authentication policies, again, we're going to be going into more depth on this in the masterclass, is again the idea of saying, can I look at geofencing, for example, talked about in the earlier, and make decisions on how I authenticate, when do I authenticate, what access, or even allow, deny access depending on that. Another new feature we've introduced specifically here on Ping Federate is around elastic scaling support. And this is really, the idea of having, I need to support X number of users, and you fix that number of servers, and they're always up and available. For a lot of enterprises, that's not really the world anymore. It's the variability in our demand changes over time. Changes maybe in the retail business in the U.S., the holidays are big times where I need a lot of capacity to handle a lot of users. Right? The rest of the year, I don't need all that capacity, so I want to be more elastic. I want to be more dynamic in how I do that, and we've introduced that with Ping Federate with 8.1. Okay, so that's kind of some of the new stuff that we're introducing. As I said, you can see more about that in our masterclass. Now let's get to what I really want to talk about here, and it's, in a sense, what I'm talking about is what can you do today, with Ping Federate, Ping Access, Ping One, Ping ID. What exists today? What can you actually do kind of in this use case? And so what I'm going to do, as I said, is focus on what's available today, okay? In the products, release products. The masterclass will go actually into a little bit more depth in some of this. And so some of the, for example, that adaptive authentication context, I'm not going to really go into that use case in my example. But it could be very easily incorporated because that is available today. I'm dealing with two basic sets of users. Internal users, whether they're employees or contractors, that I have in my system. When I say internal, basically, is I manage them in the premise, on premise, in a directory of some type. And I'm giving them access to applications. Whether those applications are internal or external really doesn't matter, but I'm managing those users. And for those users, I want to require two-factor authentication. The other use case, again, in the same environment, is I've got external identities. Now, here I want to be clear that I'm not talking about Federation external identities. They're still my identities, but I'm not managing them in my on-premise. I'm basically managing them on the cloud because it's a more dynamic set of users that I want to incorporate the ability, for example, for self-registration. And those users are probably coming in and out more often, so I don't want to dirty up my on-premise solution. Okay? And I also need different access requirements for those users based on my versus my internal users. So again, how do I manage that? The other thing I want to do in my use case is I've got this internal store. I'm using an external SaaS application. How do I provision to that SaaS application? Okay, because yeah, SSO is a great solution. Okay, but if when I get to the other side with my identity, with my security token, my SAML assertion, my ID token, whatever it is, if the other guy doesn't really know what that identity is about, I really didn't accomplish. So there's the provisioning challenge, the provisioning problem. So I want to show that also. Okay. The external identity store, I'm going to use the ping1 directory. The internal identity store is going to be Active Directory. So to start off my demo, my first use case is going to be the internal use case, internal users. So then this is where I'm going to introduce the idea of the provisioning. So I've got ping federate. Ping federate is connected to a directory, Active Directory, where I can add, remove users, and so forth. It's also my source for authentication. So users come in, I authenticate them, and then they're going to go off, and I'm using the ping1 application doc to basically act as essentially my entry point to those applications. And if the user wants to access certain applications out there in the cloud, in my example, I'm going to use Salesforce, I want to do a second factor authentication when they go to access the application. So I do a first factor with ping federate, but I'm moving the second factor into ping1 because that's where my access to those applications, the ones I want to restrict access to or require a second factor are actually being managed or access is granted from. I'm also doing provisioning. When a new user gets added into the directory, I want to be able to push that user through ping1 out to Salesforce. Okay? And my idea with the provisioning, for those of you that are familiar with ping federate, the idea of provisioning through ping1, I could just as easily do it through ping federate to Salesforce. That's something we can do today. But I'm thinking ahead, to the earlier session, right after lunch, the orchestration session, where we're going to essentially manage this in a more centralized environment. So I'm kind of going down that path, ultimately. Or that's my goal. Okay? So let me go ahead and, well, I'm going to start off with first creating that identity. Okay? So I'm adding a brand new user here. Okay? Into my directory, and I made him a member of a particular group, and I'm kind of starting that process because that takes some time. We've got to go, ping federate's got to detect the change, send the change to ping1, ping1's got to push it to Salesforce. So while that's going on, let me go in, and I'm going to log in as an existing user that is already in the system. Okay. I'll log in as Joe. All right. So now I'm on the one application doc. I've got one application that this user has access to, Salesforce. So I went through a first factor authentication against Active Directory. The user clicks on the link. Okay. And I'm sure some of you have seen this. So at this point, my phone is being pinged. I'm going to swipe. Acknowledged. And I'm in. Honestly, so demo's exciting. Man, this should make you just want to jump for joy and clap, right? Yeah. all right, yeah. I can hear the sarcastic claps, you know. It's just, all right, so Joe's logged in. Let me actually kill that browser. And I'm going into my Salesforce account here as my administrator. And let's see if my new user came in. Demo CIS. Okay, so that's the user I just added to demo CIS into the system. And so I'm going to log in now as that user. So I'm going to go open up Chrome. Okay, whoops. Click, ping one on desktop, demo, CIS, password. Okay. All right, so obviously this user is an Active Directory. Okay. He's coming in for the first time. He's got access to the Salesforce application. He's a member of the right group. He clicks to go to Salesforce. Clicks again because his finger's not working right. And because he's not, this is his first time, we need to basically register him for a second factor. So I don't have a second phone, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an alternative authentication method. I'm going to use YubiKey. So my user, I issued him one. Plug it into my USB port here. Click the button. And he's in, and it's his first time in Salesforce, so he's being welcomed, and yep, we'll kind of skip that too. And so that's basically the first use case. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. Okay, so that was, as I said, a combination of access, authentication, and provisioning all that identities. So my second use case, this is strictly external users. Okay, so what I've got is these users are being managed in a ping1 directory. My reasoning for that is I can use it for self-registration, so users can register and create their own accounts, and I don't have to directly manage those. But I want to be able to control their access to certain applications. So in this case, it's an internal application that I'm protecting by ping access, and I've got a policy in there that restricts access to certain parts of the application based on group membership. So a user can create an account, but I can go in as an administrator and give them access to certain parts of the application. So what I'm going to show in this one, so I'll go in to my ping1 directory. And interest time is I have two users in there, JGD1, JGD2. I'm very, elaborate in my naming convention. Okay. Okay. So let me go ahead and open a new window. And this time I'm going to click a different link for a different application, because these users I'm not giving access to through ping1. So again, authentication is happening through ping Federate. But in this case, ping Federate is going to the ping1 directory. And I'm still using the HTML form adapter. So I log in as JGD1. Sign on. This is through ping access. So we're actually doing OpenID Connect. So in the earlier example, I was using SAML. SAML to ping Federate to ping1, SAML from ping1 to Salesforce. In this example, I'm using OpenID Connect, and the reason I put in the authorization page is basically to show, yep, this is an OAuth flow where we're doing OpenID Connect. Click Allow. The user's into the application. Okay? I'm going to access my restricted resource. And he has access because he's a member of the app users role. Okay? So close my browser, open a new one. Oops, I didn't want to do that one. And this time I'm going to log in as my other user. And hopefully get the password right. Okay? Allow. Okay? So now if we look, his only role is users. He's not a member of app users, so when he tries to access role-based, he get access denied because he's not in the right group. Okay? And that's it. And I still have some time for questions. So I guess I worked out the timing perfectly. Well, yeah. So any questions?
Stunned silence. Single sign on demos. Every time.
Now, most of you probably can imagine what the configuration is like if you're familiar with products. I said this is pretty much out of the box. This is all released product. Didn't have enough time to go into the configuration. That, to me, would have been the fun part, is actually dive down into the details of the configuration. Okay? But it's pretty straightforward. Is that I'm using it said Active Directory connected to Ping 1. And provisioning the user. So there's really, there was no additional plugins on that. It's basically out of the box, okay? And that was kind of my goal for this, was to essentially show you, out of the box, what can you do today? And in anticipation of what you can do tomorrow with what some of what we talked about in the earlier sessions.
Oh, question at the back. Yeah. Is it which character from Dallas he looks like? Aging myself.
Having the light shined on you. Now I know what it feels like to be on stage, like,
So the multi-factor authentication, where you were using your phone as your second authentication, or your thumb drive as a second, that's all part of Ping 1?
It's part of the Ping ID product. So I configured my Ping ID setup to use either mobile device, phone, or YubiKey. So I had the two options. So my first user I already had set up on my phone, so that's why I had to use a second device.
Right. So the keys on the device are configurable through the product?
Yes. Yeah. And which option? So the default with Ping ID is just phone, but I went in and, as an administrator, and turned on the option to use YubiKey, to use an additional factor. And I could have used SMS or email as some other factor. Or I could even have done a second device if I really wanted to, but the YubiKey was a lot easier.
Hey, question on the the role-based access control. How did you configure that? Is that like if I had a homegrown web app or something, could I layer something in front of that to determine which role that I have when I'm authenticating to it, or is there like an access broker in front of it?
That was actually Ping Access. So that part is the applications being fronted by Ping Access as a proxy solution, essentially, and so the role is actually defined in Ping Access. So Ping Access, when I try to hit the application, initiated the login session, the OpenID Connect request to Ping Federated to authenticate, came back with an ID token which included my roles, my group membership, and then the rule, the access control rule is actually in Ping Access, not in the application. The identity information was shared with the application because as when we saw on the page, it simply was passed as headers, but the actual access control was done in Ping Access, not in the application.
So how does that overlay into like existing applications? Like, would that be an easy integration, or do you have to recode the application to work with ping access?
It depends basically on the application, and it's how do you share identity information with. In this example, I'm using a classic application that can be put behind a proxy and can take its information as custom headers. Now, the other choice too, often, when you get to access control, it becomes kind of where do we make those decisions? Do we make them in the application, or do we make them in front of the application? In this example, I did it in front of the application because I'm kind of a gross level access to a particular part of the application. But I'm also sharing information with the application, the identity information with the application, so that it could do finer grained access. Okay, so yes, I have access to this part of the application, but maybe I don't have access to edit a particular field. Okay, so it's more a matter of managing, your access control. Where do you want to define that? Okay? So you have the flexibility. So in this particular case, it's all done in front. The application effectively just says, you can look at it from a perspective. It just said, you gave me a valid identity, and you sent me a request to present that page. I'm going to assume you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So therefore, I'm assuming this user has that right. So the application is not really doing anything about it.
Okay, thank you. And is ping access hosted, or is that internally run? Cloud hosted?
No, it's not cloud hosted. It's an enterprise. It's like Ping Federate is Ping Access's enterprise solution.
It's a typical web access management type of product, right? That can be used to protect on-prem resources, web and APIs. But I could also use it to, if I've got resources that I'm putting on AWS, for example, I could also use it there. All right.
The access management piece could also have been done with like various API gateways. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we could have shared. Essentially, what I was passing and doing the authentication was through, OpenID Connect through an OAuth. Okay, so another application that made an OpenID Connect request could get an ID token and make its own decisions.
All right.
Or an access token, and as Lee pointed out, this also could be used with an API to control, do pure OAuth access control.
Okay. My next question you can ignore if you choose, but I'm curious as to how you configured PingFed to do SAML or OpenID Connect for the federated aspects of it. Is there a short answer to that?
Basically, for the SAML configuration, Ping Federate is acting as an identity provider, a SAML identity provider, in this case, the Ping1. So I created a SAML SP connection to Ping1 as essentially my service provider. In the case of Ping Access for the OpenID Connect, I configured Ping Federate as an OAuth authorization server, OpenID Connect authorization server identity provider. In both cases, I'm essentially using the same adapter. I could have actually used the same data source. So for example, I could have given my internal users access to the application also. Because the adapters, in my particular example, were different because I'm going to two different data sources.
Right.
But I could have used the same adapter in both places.
Is Ping Access an OAuth client of the IDP?
Ping Access
Or of
is
the
a web
AS?
it's a relying party. Okay? In the OAuth OpenID Connect world, it's basically a relying party, or as we know it in the SAML world, a service provider. It's a web access management solution that protects the applications behind it. So in this case, I'm using the proxy approach, but I could have also done it with an agent, for example. Okay.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question.
Oh yeah, and Scott just pointed out, in the master class, we're actually going to do a similar use case and go to actually through the configuration rather than just the, okay.
In the demo, you have user state or session state in Ping Access, Ping Federate, Ping1, and Salesforce. How does the single logout scenario work out of the box today?
Okay. Single logout, as we know, is a challenge. Okay. So it can be done, but all the players essentially have to agree on it. Okay. So with ping access and ping federate, I could set up single logout so that I can initiate a logout from ping access and terminate the session, authentication session on ping federate. For the SAML connection, I need to be able to support single logout. Okay? Ping 1 supports that also. So I could set up my, and it actually is configured that way in my setup. I just didn't use a single logout. But to make it work out of the box, all the players in the equation have to essentially support it in some way. Ping Federate, as the identity provider, is basically essentially the session authority. Okay? So logout really begins with him. It can start at the application, but ultimately has to go to the identity provider, and then he notifies the parties that he's aware of that essentially have established a session, that have been, and also notifies those parties that have been configured for logout, because the challenge with single logout is not necessarily everybody does it. Okay, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to send a logout request to an application that doesn't know what you're talking about. Okay, so you'd have to make sure all the players can actually support it and be configured for it. Okay.
Hey, John, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.